About time for us to get started with our class this morning. Kent's going to lead a prayer for us as we start.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this opportunity on this Lord's Day to come and worship You. We thank Thee so much for all the things that You have done for us, especially that of sending Your Son to die on the cross for our sins. We ask Thee to go with us through this Bible study. Help us to have an open heart, open mind to receive the word that You have given us. Help us to interpret it in the way that it should be, and then help us to use it in our everyday lives. We ask that we thank You so much for the health that we enjoy. We ask You to continue to be with us in all things. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.
As studying the lesson and going around, I couldn't help but think with all the news that's going on in the U.S. and the concerns that we have with the virus and things like this and how it's changing our lives. The events that we're going to be studying about this morning are not life-changing events, they're eternity-changing events. It affects our eternity, and it's as we focus on these, we really need to think about this. We're going to be in lesson 12 today, and what happens in lesson 12 and what we'll be discussing right now, I think really evolves right down to where our eternity is. What did we study last week? What happened last week that was pretty changing effect? What happened? I remember what we studied about. Yeah, the crucifixion. And we say a lot of times that the crucifixion, and it really was one of those huge things, but without what we're going to study about today, a lot of people have died for their beliefs. We even had some of the apostles later that were martyred and they died for their belief. But as we study today, Jesus not only died for that belief, but what's he going to be doing that we're studying today? It's the resurrection. And without that resurrection, then we might be looking at Jesus just like other people or other things that went on. So we see what's happening with the resurrection. As we look at today, at what's happening, the first thing in class, the events start out on what day of the week? Sunday. Yeah, because the women headed to the tomb early in the morning. In fact, we know probably about what time. What time do you think they headed out there? Yeah, probably about, why do we think? No, it was 6 o'clock. Why didn't they go at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 2 o'clock? What would have been going on, what day would have been going on before 6 o'clock? The Sabbath day would have been going on, and they weren't, particularly when you get into dead bodies and things like that, that would not have been something you would have been doing. So they waited till after the Sabbath, and it was early in the morning when they went to the tomb. And that was going back with their training that they had. Now, before they got to the tomb, what were they expecting? Well, first off, they being who went. If we look in the last of the chapters of all four Gospels, who all's identified as going out there? First, we know they were all what? They were all women. The first thing that went out. Wonder why? I think when we look at the women of the world, they tend to have a lot of times more compassion, more concern. They were headed out to see what they could do. And in fact, what were they going to do when they got there? Yeah, they were going to take care of the body. They had already done that before and wrapped it, and they were still going back because one of their concerns as they were headed there, what was one of their major concerns? Yeah, how are they going to move the stone? They got this big stone, and how are they going to get it rolled out of the way? Now, who are some of the women that went out there? Do we remember, as you studied today in this, who's some of the women that went? Two Marys. One Mary Magdalene, and then the other Mary, who was the mother of James. Anybody else? There's some, boy, I'll tell you what I learned when I never remembered one of the people that suddenly it creeped up in one of them, Joanna. And Joanna was the wife of one of Herod's stewards, and Jesus had done some healing around her, and she'd gotten interest in it. And I believe her name was in Luke or John's account, but it was Joanna, and then Salome went. Not Herod's granddaughter. It was the other Salome that went in, and they were involved. So we see some people that had a lot of notoriety, and then a couple of people that are just kind of named that they go out. So they go out to the tomb, and they're trying to, again, be concerned on how they're going to get in. And so they get there, and what do they find? They find out about what, the rock again? It had been rolled out of the way. Yeah, was it very far off? Actually, if you read some of the details in one of the accounts, we see one of the angels sitting on the stone. So they basically rolled it out of the way so the door was open and they could go in. What do you think that these ladies were expecting to find when they got there? A dead man. They were expecting to do a dead man, that they were going to do what to? They were going to put the spices on, take care of the body, do what people did with dead people back there. They were expecting that. I think it helped. Just reading this, and I guess as I kind of thought about this thing all week, when we start thinking about what these Marys went through and then what the other apostles went through, I don't know how any of us would act, but suddenly stuff started happening that you're going, wow. First off, the Marys get there, and the stone is moved away, and it's just those things. In fact, what does it mention? It mentions in one of the accounts what had happened about the same time. Because who was there? Let's talk about first. Who was there when they got there with a stone? Angels, yeah, angels. Man, that would be pretty interesting, I think. Lee, when was the last time you saw a real angel? Yeah, we just don't, we don't do that. And back in those times, they weren't used to seeing angels either. So they show up, talked about that the stone had been, there was an earthquake, and then it talks about in one of the accounts that the angels, when they looked at the angel and saw the things, it looked like there was lightning. Do we like lightning? Just normally we don't even like lightning, but suddenly here is this, it talks about this angel being this lightning. And then what else did it look like? Yeah, white. It was this whole thing. We kind of get some of our impressions of these things. Take ourselves back 2,000 years. What would happen if we went into a cemetery, the grave was open, it looked like lightning, there was this being, solid white, started talking to you? What would we do? When we stop and think about these people were faced with not only the loss of Jesus, but now they're faced with all these things. And just when we go in, it's just like, whoa, we're not sure. Jason?
The events surrounding the people that came to the tomb is almost so fantastical that it either has to be completely made up or it just is exactly what happened. Like God has shown out before, but at the resurrection, he just did something so fantastic that, so it's got to be one or the other.
Right.
If it's not true, then this is the worst lie ever.
Right.
but to obey God.
Right. And I think, and I guess this is where I'm going, because it is fantastic, way beyond whatever they thought it was going to be. It was just, wow. Lee? Yep, yep. And they did have the guard on it, and they became part of the Jews. Well, let's go pay them off, which is kind of interesting in what they did there. And the soldiers, we'll talk about this a little bit later on too, they were faced with what if they let something happen to Jesus? They were death. I mean, they were going to die. They had to guard Jesus. Of course, the interesting point, if you get right down to the detail, we'll find out was Jesus gone at this point. He was alive, but was he gone? Because he actually comes out and talks to them a little bit later and asks them what they're looking for. The angels are there and others, but then at one point it talks about when Mary Magdalene's talking to him, how does she recognize Jesus? The voice. He didn't recognize him in what he looked like and everything, but then when he said something to it, it says that Mary recognized his, my Lord. She knew him by voice that he was there. So we've got all of these things that are just going on right here, and these people are really just amazed at what's going on. What's the angel tell the women as they look in? It's recorded in each one of the Gospels, the same thing. The angels are looking in, and you get the same thing. And they're looking for Jesus, and what do the angels announce to them? It's part of this thing, and Jason's talking about the grandeur. The angels are announcing to the women that what? He is risen. Do you think they comprehended he is risen? I'm not sure. I think eventually they did, but we still have to just realize all of this grandeur that they're just sitting there and the angel did tell them to come in and see where he lay. And then it's interesting, the angel said, "Why are you looking for the living where dead people are? He ain't dead anymore. He died, but he's not dead anymore." The fact that he's not dead anymore says, I have a chance for what? Salvation. I mean, this is pretty earth-shaking for us. This is a whole lot more important than the pandemic is. This is a whole lot more important because this affects our salvation, and Jesus died for us. And we have these ladies that are going through just with these things, and they're kind of blowing their mind away. Now, what group of people who are not very big fans of Jesus, suddenly what have they got to do? They got to get a different story. Who wanted Jesus killed? Yeah, the Jews. What body of Jews made sure that he was killed? The Pharisees, Sanhedrin, the ruling body said, you got to be killed. Suddenly, the word comes back to them that he's now what? He's now undead. He's alive. And suddenly now, do you think that the Sanhedrin, that ruling body, knew when that body went in that grave that body was dead? I don't think it's in doubt they knew it. They totally knew it was. In fact, they went so much so when they buried Jesus, and Joseph got permission for him to be put in the grave. And they buried Jesus. What did they go back and ask happened to it, to the grave? Be guarded. Put a seal on it. Do all of this thing. And when they put the seal on the grave and put the guards around the grave, how serious a job was that for the guards? Life or death. If you keep him in there, you're alive. If you let him get out, it's a death. I mean, basically a death penalty. I don't know. I've just tried to think. Wonder what the conversation was when the Sanhedrin pulled the guards in. By the way, the guards work for who? Yeah, the Sanhedrin, but the guards also were Roman guards too. There were Sanhedrin guards, yeah?
Well, we were talking about this, in Matthew 27, the Sanhedrin, or the Jewish leaders come to Pilate, and he says, you secure it, in verse 27, 66, says, they went, made the stone, the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard.
Okay.
We were just discussing the thing that the guards were Jewish, even though I've always thought about them being Roman.
But although I think they still had that thing of the Romans, because when they went to the Jews, let's go back to now let's go to the next agreement, which I think carries back it carried some of the Roman thing with it. Came to the Jews, and they explained what happened. So the Jews said, number one, here's your story now. And what was their story? What did the Sanhedrin want them to say? Yeah, they came and stole the body. So they knew he was dead. They weren't going to have any part of this. He got alive again, so they came and stole the body. You do this. You tell this story. And by the way, we're going to do two things for you if you tell this story. What's the first thing they did for him? What's that? Yeah, well, they let him live, but they also did what else with him? Yeah, paid him a bunch of money. I think when you look at this, they got a lot of money out of this. They did pretty well. They got money. But then after they said that, by the way, we're going to give you all this money, and then what are we going to do? Yeah, if it gets back to whoever their people were, which I think at this time the Romans still had some authority over them, because why would they need to, if it was just their stuff, some of the protecting, but it said, we're going to give you money, and we're also going to protect you. If somebody comes up, we'll take care of you and protect you. Why were they interested in doing that? Any reason why you think that they would be interested in doing that? Right. They knew that if the story of the resurrection was true and they couldn't destroy it, everything from their whole thing was gone. This goes back to the grandeur that Jason was talking about earlier in this whole event, that all of these things happening. Now, this is all happening real quick in the morning that these events are going on. What do the women do finally after they looked in, and what do the women do? Yeah, they go tell folks. Basically, they're telling Peter, James, and John, and those folks. And then what do? That's exactly right. They have a foot race to see who can get back to the tomb fast. They're going, wow. So if they're willing to go that mode, and like Lee said, have the foot race, did they believe the women? Probably did. But at this point, we're still out of here in whole things of where just as humans, we're beyond what's comprehension going on in a lot of these things. it's just all of this stuff that's going on, and it's hard for us to comprehend what's happening inside of these things. This is happening this morning. What period of Christ's life is this beginning now? What's going to happen? But we go from here to when he ascends into heaven. How long is it? 50. Yeah, it's 50 days. And because it's going to from the Passover to the Pentecost feast, and it's 50 days. So this is the beginning of the final 50 days that he's going to be on the earth. And we see these events happening. Do you think the apostles had any clue what was fixing to happen in the next few days? They didn't have a clue. That's right. He told them, and he told them, and he did tell them. But you still go back. What's one of our benefits of being able to see the resurrection as we see it? The Bible. We see the whole story, so we're viewing it kind of from a historical standpoint. They're seeing it day at a time. Rufus? Oh, absolutely. It is being orchestrated by the Holy Spirit, and it's the beginning of where we have huge responsibilities laid on us as God's people. It started with the apostles and what they did, and he's orchestrating it through. We see it, and there are some verses that as Christians we better just listen real hard, because he puts a lot of responsibility on us. We see the story that's happening, but he puts a lot of the responsibility that goes with us. So Jesus leaves fairly quickly that day. And who does he run into? This is just really kind of just such an interesting side story. We talk about the apostles being kind of interested, and they were involved, and they see all this happening, but suddenly two guys are headed where? Emmaus, where the men that were going home from Emmaus had been where? They'd been in Jerusalem. Yeah. In fact, what had they observed? Yeah, the Passover, and I think the crucifixion too. I mean, they knew what happened. They knew all that was happening, because it talks about these two people were going home from Jerusalem, and they were chatting about what? Everything happened. I mean, they're just talking about what's happened. Are they sad or glad about what happened? Sad. They're sad. Yeah, they really are. They obviously were followers or believed in Jesus. They were sad about what was going on. And this is the other thing I think I've kind of wondered. First time Jesus showed up to the women in the tomb, did they know him? They did not know him. First time. He had to tell them who he was. What does that say about the way he looked that Sunday morning versus how he looked the Friday morning? Different. He just looked different. I mean, he looked different. Didn't know who he was. He had changed. Again, we go back, like Carl said a while ago, the way Mary knew that it was Jesus talking to her was not how he looked, but it was how he sounded and spoke when he said Mary. And she says, ooh, I know who you are now. So he looked. So Jesus joins himself up with these two guys that are going back home. Anybody know how far it was from Jerusalem to Emmaus? 7 miles. Tells us in one of the accounts it was 7 miles. a 5-minute journey. Jason, you go to work, and it's, what, about 7 miles from you to get to Spring Hill? Something like that. If you drive the speed limit, you can be there in 5 or 10 minutes. What was the speed limit for them? Walk. Depends on whether it's fast, walk, slow. So now if you're strolling for 7 miles, do you have time for a conversation? Yeah, you can have a long conversation. So they're going down the road, and they're talking, and then Jesus joins up with them. And what do they know about Jesus at this point, or about this man that's talking to them? Nothing. They're just having a conversation. What did Jesus note about him? When he's going down the road, what question did he ask him? He said, what's the matter? What's going on? What's your concern? Your sad countenance mentions that. So if he noticed that they had a sad countenance, that kind of tells us something about those two men going home, and we see that later on. They were sad about what? They were sad about Jesus dying. And they're talking about what went on and the events that happened in town. Now, if they'd been in town for the Passover, they probably had been there for this whole thing that happened. They were there during the Passover. Jesus was taken in, and if they were Jews, they probably knew what the Sanhedrin had done. This was all public. They saw Jesus beaten. They saw him put in a grave, and now they're going home sad because why? Yeah, he's dead. As human beings, if we see, back when we had, I guess the last president of the U.S. was Kennedy, who was assassinated and killed. As leaders and all that, why were people sad when that happened? Because the human nature is when somebody dies, and particularly if they're in public and something like that, there's a sadness because we have no expectation of what? Seeing him again. These two guys going home had zero expectation that this stranger walking with them was the guy that was hanging on the cross and got put in the tomb. They just didn't know that. Now, they were sad about Jesus doing, and they were down, but they just didn't know that it was going on. So, after a while, what did Jesus tell them? It's me. You know, as they walked down the road, it was like that. Wow, what would we do? What would we do if we were walking down the road and all of a sudden we didn't know it, but Jesus had been walking and talking with us, and all this happened? Wonder what their reactions were. Yeah, I mean, and it says, they were shocked. They were done less. But later when they thought about it, what did they say happened while they were talking to him? They knew he was special. How? Wayne? Yeah. Yeah, he knew all these things. Their spirit burned in them when he was talking. They knew he was different. Now, I'll tell you what, I think these guys were really major good guys. Because what did they do after they found out all that? What's that? Yeah. But what else did they do with Jesus that night, though? Where? Where did they spend time together? Yeah. But I think it mentions they got where they were going and took him where? What's that? Yeah. It's where they took him home with them. I mean, they're from Emmaus, and they took him home with them. do we ever think about taking Jesus to our home with us? I mean, what would we do? Would we be scared? They went, took him, fed him, and then after he left, it just talks about, they said, wow, now we understand the more they spent time, and it talked about how he's with me. He was with us, and we're talking, and how our spirits burned, and how it just, they didn't comprehend it, but now they saw what it was. Does Jesus talk to us today? Yeah, through his word. Now, he doesn't, I mean, he's not going to come down and walk down the road with us, but they didn't have the word at that time either. That was the way he got it done. Does our spirit ever burn in us when he talks to us? It should, yeah. I mean, really, it should do that. And as we take the word, if I'm reading the word, I should be focused as I'm studying this word on how I can use this word to make Wayne a better person, right? If I study this Bible and Wayne's got all this junk going on in his life, then I'm studying this to see how I can help God make him a better person. Is that a right approach on studying the Bible? Yeah, it's really, this is given to me. So if I'm interested in heaven, if I spend time looking at this and see what it says, because it's Jesus talking to me and God and the Holy Spirit led it, then that tells Bradley how he can be good. Now, do I need to be willing to chat with Wayne if he is doing bad stuff? I need to do that, but I need to be doing it so it's the Word of God that's going through us and looking at it. So, you know, as we go through these, there's some real lessons that Jesus has. So, when we go a little bit later in his life, and Jesus starts meeting with the apostles, and they're having a lot of troubles with kind of grasping a hold of everything, but the apostles met with Jesus. He told them who he was, and they basically believed him, except which one? Which apostle didn't believe? Thomas. Why didn't he believe? Well, he wasn't there. I mean, he was there. So I don't think this was quite as much of a problem with him not believing with Jesus if he'd been there. But who really didn't he believe? Who do you think was pretty crazy? Yeah, he thought the other apostles were great. You're hallucinating. I don't believe it. Why would he not believe it? Because humans don't do what? They don't raise from the dead. Humans who have been dead 3 days really don't raise from the dead. Humans who have been beaten and nailed to a cross and shed all of their blood are not going to be raised from dead. So human spirit said that. Now, and the Bible, our little classes and all that, we teach doubting Thomas. We have to be careful on that because most of us might have gone through our life sometimes doubting things that Jesus said too. Interesting. So, how did Thomas believe? Be careful, now it's a trick question. We all teach he believed by doing what? We say because he felt it. Be honest with you, when you read the record in John, it says nothing about him touching it. It just said he looked at it and saw the wounds, and Jesus invited him to, but it doesn't say he did. doesn't say he touched him. It's not big whether it does or not, but I just think sometimes we talk about him having to do it. He did see the wound, but when you look at the account, it does not say that he felt it. He was invited to. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't when he went in. Was Jesus upset with him? It doesn't even indicate that he was upset. He just knew he had the problems. He wasn't there with Jesus when it was the rest of it was room. So he just said, look, here I am. I'm accepted. And what did Thomas do? He accepted it. He came in. I think one of the interesting things about this, he was one of the ones that loved Jesus. Do we ever have times when we question Jesus, whether he's real or not? Even as Christians, do we go through time? I think there might be Christians in the world today wondering, come on, God, why are you letting this happen to us this week? Why did you let the tornado go through? We doubt sometimes where God is. If we spend enough time in God's word and let that word work in our hearts, can he help overcome our doubts? I think if we love him, he can help. We need to just spend time with him with words, and we can do this. Thomas had doubts, but it didn't bother him. Actually, how much time went from the time the other apostles and Thomas said, nope, I'm not going to believe it until I see it and feel it. Remember how long it took him before he ran into Jesus? 8 days. Yeah, it's one of those things that came back. It was 8 days later, so that has nothing to do with anything, just kind of interesting. That's 8 of the 50 days that he was working inside of that. All right. So, towards the end of the 50 days, Peter and Jesus have a discussion. What question did Jesus ask Peter? Do you love me? What answer did Peter give him? Yes. What question did Jesus ask Peter? And what answer did Peter give him? He said yes. And then what question did Jesus ask Peter? Yeah, same thing. It just goes back and forth, and he's just driving home. And Peter, he kind of gets frustrated. Now, each time he tells him, not only when Peter says that he loves him, so Peter said, you know I do, and Jesus told him first time to feed who? Yeah, feed the lambs, feed the sheep. Second time he asked him, he says, tend the sheep. And then he, at the end, he goes in. Now, Peter was going to have a job as an apostle to tend and feed sheep. Do people have that same role today? Whose role is it to tend and feed sheep? All Christians. Now, sometimes we like to say the job of tending sheep belongs to who? What's that? Yeah, but if you're an elder, we like to pass it off too. So we say it's whose problem to feed the sheep and tend the sheep. We pass it to the preachers. We pass it off because if it's talking about tending and feeding sheep, what does that imply? A little bit of work, a little bit of faithful thing. An interesting point that some of us was Frederick yesterday morning before we had the class, and he's working in a pretty inner city church inside of Tampa. They don't have elders, and he was talking about if people have problems as leadership, he's just getting eat up with people that have problems, and they come in, and he was talking about 4 or 5 times a day, he's dealing with people to try to help them, and kind of what it goes in. What are we doing when we spend time? What's he doing when he's spending that time? Isn't he tending and feeding? And whose responsibility is? It's Christians' responsibility to tend and feed the flock. Does it cost money to tend the flock? Can. But it costs, what does it cost more than money? Time. Yeah, we have time. So that says that if we're worried about loving God and he's saying feed my sheep and tend my sheep, that might be something that we need to do, so we better be sure that we do what with our time? Kind of allocate our time into this. One of the huge, huge, huge benefits of what's happening in our country right now, what every person got more of now than we had 2 weeks ago. We got more time. We've got more time to spend because we're not going to be watching basketball games. We're not going to be, when they even canceled the symphony. That's crazy. No, it's not. Laurel and I go to the symphony a lot, and we had made the comment and said, boy, that'll be a cesspool of dead people because everybody's about 90 that goes to the symphony anyhow. So we've suddenly said, wow, the whole world has slowed down, not traveled. This is a benefit where we can maybe use this and just say, how can I in my life now reprioritize what's important? Do I have time now maybe to spend a little bit more because we don't have all this thing going on? TV's even not fun anymore. You got to watch reruns. I mean, it literally has changed our lives where we're down. So what's the last thing that, yes?
Does that 2 times. Then the 3rd time, Jesus says, do you phileo me? And I think that's very telling of where Peter was at that time. That sacrificial, give anything, do the best for the person's love, agape.
Right.
He wasn't at that point. Even after Jesus, he had been with them through his ministry, seen the resurrected Lord, he wasn't at that place. And I wonder sometimes, if we phileo Jesus, but we really need to work toward and get to agape, that our lives completely center around who he is, what he did, and our mission to help him and help others get closer to him.
And part of that, if we phileo God, when we're going to pay attention to him in our lives today? A lot. Sundays. I mean, a lot of times that revolves around church when we meet. If it's agape, when are we going to be involved with him? All the time. We're going to see the opportunities, and it's going to come up. In fact, one of the last things right before they go in there, when he's talking to the apostles, and he's throwing out the Great Commission, and this is one of the things that he tells them, where does he want them to be agape? He tells them to go where? Into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. Who's he talking to? What's that? Yeah, he's talking to all of us.
That he stayed that long on earth to imprint into their minds the
Yeah, and I think the whole trauma, Rufus, of him dying, they had been with him 3 years traveling everywhere, seeing all this stuff he did, but they didn't, I don't think he still grasped exactly what it was. So the resurrection added this whole new things, and he spent this 50 days, and primarily with them. We see him doing a few other things, but he's primarily with them and putting it down. The beauty we have, let's go back to the whole account. We see it all laid out and kind of see how it's unfolding. How did they see it? Day at a time, how you had to get it in there. See? Right. That's right. And it was signs and wonders with everything. One thing it mentions right towards the end of it, he had them on the seacoast and they didn't have anything to eat. So he told them, throw your nets out, and they brought the fish in and had the fire on the beach, and they had grilled fish that night. Literally roasted, I think it said roasted fish and honeycombs that they ate. But he's with them showing the full power that he had. So it ground in, because what have they got to do in about 2 weeks, a week, towards the end of this? Who does it roll to get this news out? Rolls to them, because as we're going to see next week when day of Pentecost comes, where is Jesus then? He's back in heaven. But he left the word, he left these things. And this event is hugely important for us as we just shape our lives. If we took a vote in here this morning and asked everybody to vote, where do you want to be in eternity? People do polls all the time. Where do you think the poll would come out this morning? I think here in this building right now, I don't think there would anybody would say, I don't want to be in heaven. I mean, that's a pretty, probably we wouldn't be here if we didn't want to be in heaven. So we have those things. This event lays out where we can see where Jesus did. We can see what he taught his apostles, like Rufus said, for these 40 to 50 days. That can apply to us in our lives. Something we will never, ever see again in that. When will we see the grandeur of God in person? End of the world. You think we'll see the grandeur of God then? It says he's going to come back. He's going to be in the air. And those that are serving him, where are we going to see it? What's he going to do with us if we have served God? He's going to take us to heaven. He's going to come down and take it to heaven. His choice or my choice? What's that? It's my choice. He says, I want everybody to go. It's our choice whether we decide to go or not. And as we go through life, we just need to make those choices go. Okay, next week we're going to be the last week in this study. We'll be talking about the day of Pentecost and the ascension and all those events that went around it. Okay.